Each one of them carried a secret, but the truth everyone wanted to know was this: someone was lying. December 14th, 1888, midnight. 3 people stood in the grand hall of Willowbrook Manor. On the floor lay the body of Lady Margaret Thornfield. Purple fingerprints marked her throat. Her eyes were open, frozen, eternalized in her final moment of terror. One of the 3 had killed her, but all of them were lying. 6 hours earlier, snow had been falling and 3 guests were arriving at Willowbrook. Each had received Lady Margaret's invitation. Each carried a secret, and none of them knew that before the night ended one would be dead and the others would conspire to conceal it. This is the story of that night, and the truth that emerged 30 years later. Lord Edmund Ashford, first arrival. The December evening had darkened early. It was barely 6:30, yet the sky had already turned black. Snow fell slowly, with an almost audible whisper in the silence of the Surrey countryside. As Lord Edmund Ashford's carriage approached Willowbrook Manor, even the creak of wheels on snow sounded ominous. Edmund gazed out the window and saw the manor, a massive silhouette rising from the darkness, brought to life only by the glow of candles seeping from a few windows. Edmund was 45 years old, tall, still handsome enough, but the lines on his face betrayed the weight of the last 5 years. The Ashford family estate teetered on the brink of bankruptcy. Since his father's death, everything had gone wrong. Poor investments, gambling debts, failed harvests had taken their toll. Edmund had knocked on every door, written to every relative, but the answer was always the same: no, the Ashford name would become history within a generation. Then came Lady Margaret Thornfield's invitation. When Edmund received the envelope, his hands trembled as he read the note inside. It was brief. An important announcement will be made at Willowbrook on the evening of December 14th. Your attendance is essential. Regarding my will. Lady M. Thornfield. Will. That word had quickened Edmund's heart. Lady Margaret was a wealthy woman, very wealthy. If his name appeared in her will, if she left him an inheritance, the Ashford family could be saved. Edmund had to hope. He had no other choice. The carriage stopped. The door opened. Cold air rushed in. Edmund climbed the steps and stood before the heavy door. Before it opened, he took a deep breath, straightened his shoulders, and arranged his face into a courteous expression. The door opened. An elderly servant waited. "Sir, welcome. Lady Thornfield is expecting you. Please, do come into the drawing room." Edmund entered. The wide corridor was panelled with dark wood. Candles cast flickering light. His footsteps echoed on the stone floor. Edmund was led to the drawing room, high-ceilinged with flames dancing in the fireplace and crystal chandeliers hanging overhead. A magnificent but empty room. Edmund would have to wait. Edmund requested a glass of water from the servant, then approached the window and looked outside. The snow was falling more heavily, and in the distance he saw the lanterns of another carriage. The second guest was arriving. Lady Victoria, Pemberton. Second arrival. Victoria sat in the carriage, her hands clasped tightly. As her carriage approached Willowbrook, her stomach churned more violently. She was 32 years old, strikingly beautiful. Dark chestnut hair, sharp green eyes, flawless skin. Her navy velvet evening gown was perfectly tailored, silver brooches glittering at her breast. From the outside, she was the perfect lady, but inside she was shattered, because Lady Victoria Pemberton's entire life was a lie. 7 years ago, when she was still Victoria Ashton, young, unmarried, the daughter of a respectable family, she had lived a forbidden love. The man was a painter. His name was Jonathan Gray. Poor, with no title, but Victoria had been in love with him. They had met in secret, written letters, and then Victoria had become pregnant. Disaster. Jonathan had vanished, frightened, unprepared, realizing he couldn't bear the responsibility. Victoria was left alone. If her family learned, she would be ruined. If society learned, she would be destroyed. Victoria had hidden the birth, in a small cottage with only a midwife. The pain was unbearable, but worse was seeing the baby and then having to say goodbye. A girl. Victoria hadn't even given her a name, because naming her would have made it hurt more. The baby had been given to a farming family, in exchange for money. No one would ever know. 6 months later, Victoria married Lord Pemberton, 65 years old, wealthy, ill, a widower. There was no love, but there was respectability. And when the Lord died 2 years later, Victoria was left a widow, financially secure, socially accepted. But she couldn't sleep at night, because she remembered that baby's face, and every day she feared that someone would learn. When Lady Margaret Thornfield's invitation arrived, Victoria's hands had trembled. Margaret was a woman who knew everything, the ear of society. If Margaret knew Victoria's secret, Victoria couldn't refuse the invitation. Not going would be tantamount to confession. The carriage stopped. Victoria took a deep breath, put on her mask and stepped out. Snow stuck to her shoes. Cold bit her face. Victoria climbed the steps. The door opened. The same elderly servant waited. "Lady Pemberton, welcome. Lady Thornfield is expecting you." Victoria entered and was directed to the drawing room. There she saw a man standing near the fireplace. He turned. It was Lord Ashford. Victoria knew him, superficially. They had encountered each other a few times in society. Edmund bowed his head. "Lady Pemberton, what a surprise." Victoria responded courteously. "Lord Ashford, indeed." They both shared the same thought. Why are we here? Before they could speak, the sound of a third carriage was heard. Dr. P. Henry Blackwell. Third arrival, Henry nearly stumbled as he stepped from the carriage. His hands were shaking. He was 38 years old, of medium height, slight build, his black hair carefully combed, but his face was pale. Dark circles rimmed his eyes. Dr. Henry Blackwell's profession was to save lives. But 6 months ago, he had taken one. The patient had been a wealthy merchant. His name was George Whitmore. He was 60 years old, suffering from severe kidney disease. Henry had given him morphine to ease the pain. But that night, Henry was tired, careless. He had miscalculated the dose, too much morphine. George Whitmore was dead by morning. Henry had panicked. If the truth came out, his career would end. He might even go to prison. In fear, he had lied on the death certificate. Natural causes, kidney failure. The family didn't question it. The funeral was held. George was buried. Henry had escaped, but his conscience hadn't. Every night he saw George's face. Every day when examining patients, his hands trembled, and he constantly waited for someone to find out. Lady Margaret Thornfield knew George's family. They were close friends. Henry had seen her at the funeral. Margaret had looked at him strangely. He had felt a cold fear in that moment. And now, Margaret's invitation. When Henry opened the envelope, the brief note inside had brought his fear to a peak. "Dr. Blackwell, your attendance at Willowbrook on the evening of December 14th is essential. There is an important matter we must discuss." A matter to discuss? What matter? Henry knew. Margaret knew. And now Henry had to go, because not going would be a sign of guilt. Henry climbed the steps, knocked on the door. The servant opened it. Henry was admitted and led to the drawing room. 2 others were already there, Lord Ashford and Lady Victoria. Henry didn't know them. They exchanged greetings, polite, distant. All 3 were silent. The atmosphere was tense and heavy. Each was lost in their own thoughts, and all were asking the same question. Why has Lady Margaret summoned us? The answer would come soon enough. Lady Margaret's appearance. At 8:15, the door at the top of the grand staircase opened. The 3 guests turned their heads. Lady Margaret Thornfield appeared. She was 78 years old, but her posture was still erect and authoritative. Her silver hair was pulled into a tight bun. She wore a black dress. Mourning attire. She had worn the same black dresses for 10 years, since the death of her sister, Lady Anne. Margaret descended the stairs slowly. At each step her cane echoed. The 3 guests waited. The silence was heavy. Margaret entered the drawing room. She stood before the 3 and looked at each one in turn. Her eyes gleamed with cold, sharp intelligence. Then she spoke. Her voice was low but resolute. "Welcome," she said. "Thank you for coming. I'm sure you're all wondering, why have I summoned you? Why tonight? Why these 3 people?" None of them answered. Margaret continued. "I'm going to tell you something, and I advise you to listen very carefully." Silence. Margaret smiled, but it wasn't a warm smile, it was calculating, cold. "You think I've called you here regarding my will, but that's a lie. There's nothing about my will. I've called you here for another reason." All three tensed. Margaret continued. "Because each of you has a secret, and I know them all." Edmund's heart raced. Victoria's breath caught. Henry's stomach churned. Margaret continued speaking. "Lord Ashford," she said, turning her eyes to Edmund, "I know the Ashford family is bankrupt. Your debt is £20,000. If you don't pay within 3 months, your estate will be taken from you. You're desperately searching for money, and you see me, wealthy, elderly, near death, as a way out." Edmund wanted to speak, but Margaret raised her hand to silence him. "Lady Pemberton," she said, turning to Victoria, 7 years ago, before you married, you had a forbidden affair. A painter, Jonathan Gray. You became pregnant. You secretly gave birth to the baby, a girl, and you sold her to a farming family. Now that child is 7 years old and will never know who her mother is." Victoria's face went white. She couldn't speak. Margaret finally turned to Henry. "Dr. Blackwell," she said, 6 months ago, a patient died. George Whitmore. You gave him morphine, but you miscalculated the dose. Too much. He died that night. And you lied on the death certificate. You said natural causes, but it wasn't. You killed him." Henry's knees trembled. He had to sit down. Margaret looked at all three. "Now," she said, "do you understand? Each of you has a secret, and I know them all. I have proof, documents, letters, witnesses. If I wish, tomorrow morning all your secrets will be in every newspaper in London." Silence began. Heavy, suffocating silence. Edmund finally spoke. His voice was shaking. What do you want?" Margaret smiled. "Very simple," she said. "Tonight, each of you will perform a small task for me. Very simple tasks, but very specific. If you do them, I will protect your secrets. And more. I will help you. I can give you money. Lord Ashford, enough money to pay your debts. Lady Pemberton, silence. Dr. Blackwell, protection. But," Margaret continued, "if you refuse, tomorrow morning you will all be ruined." Victoria's voice emerged, weak, broken. This is blackmail?" Margaret nodded. "Yes, exactly so." Henry stood up. "You can't do this." Margaret looked at him. "I can, and I will. The choice is yours." Edmund asked, "What are the tasks?" Margaret didn't answer. Instead, she signalled to the servants. 3 servants entered, each holding a sealed envelope. The envelopes were handed to the 3 guests. Margaret spoke. "Open the envelopes. Inside is your first instruction. Carry it out, then return, and wait. Another instruction will follow." The 3 took the envelopes but didn't open them. They were still in shock. Margaret smiled. "Begin," she said. "Your time is running short. Everything must be completed by 10 o'clock." Then she turned and slowly left the room. She climbed the stairs, closed the door. The 3 guests were left alone, and the game had begun. Edmund's task, the library. With trembling hands, Edmund opened his envelope. Inside was a brief note in Margaret's handwriting. "Go to the library. Open the green safe beside the fireplace. Code 1847. Read the document inside, then return." Edmund frowned. 1847? What did that date mean? But there was no time to question. Margaret was waiting. Edmund left the drawing room and walked down the corridor. The library was in the west wing of the manor. He opened the door. The room was dark. Only the flame in the fireplace provided dim light. Edmund entered. The shelves reached to the ceiling, filled with books, old, dusty, looking as if they'd never been read. The air smelled of dampness and old paper. Edmund approached the fireplace. Beside it, embedded in the wall, was a small safe, painted green, an old model. Edmund entered the code 1847. The safe clicked and opened. Inside was a single document, yellowed, old, written by hand. Edmund took it and held it up to the firelight. The heading read, "Thornfield Ashford Agreement, 1847. Edmund's heart quickened. What did this mean? He began to read the letter, and with each word he read, his stomach turned more. The letter stated, in 1847, Edmund's grandfather, Lord William Ashford, had formed a business partnership with Lady Margaret's father, Lord Richard Thornfield. Richard Thornfield was a wealthy man, but old and ill. William Ashford was young and ambitious. The agreement was this: William would manage Richard's business affairs, and they would share the profits. But the agreement wasn't fair. William had deceived Richard, forged documents, manipulated accounts. William had stolen a large portion of the Thornfield fortune, and with that money, he had established the Ashford estate. Edmund's family had been built on stolen wealth. Edmund set down the document. His hands were trembling. This was impossible, but the letter was there. The proof was there. Margaret knew this, and now Edmund knew it too. The Ashford fortune was a lie, a theft. Edmund put the document back in the safe. His mind was in turmoil. What would he do? Would Margaret use this information? Edmund left the library. He returned to the drawing room. There he saw Lady Victoria, her face pale, her eyes red. She too had completed her task. Victoria's task, the East Wing. When Victoria opened her envelope, the instruction inside read, "Go to the East Wing, to the first room on the second floor. On the desk is a photograph frame. Take it and burn it in the fireplace." Victoria's heart raced. A photograph. Which photograph? But she knew. Deep down, she knew. Victoria walked down the corridor toward the East Wing. Her footsteps echoed. She climbed the stairs, reached the second floor, opened the door to the first room. The room was small and plain, a bedroom, empty, unused. But on the desk stood a small silver frame. Victoria approached and picked up the frame. She looked at the photograph, and her breath stopped. In the photograph was herself, 7 years younger, happy, smiling. Beside her was a man, Jonathan Gray, the painter, her lover, and beneath the photograph, written by hand, a note. Victoria and Jonathan, 1881, happy days. But how was this photograph here? Victoria didn't think she'd ever had one taken. Jonathan must have done it, secretly. Victoria turned the photograph over. On the back was another note. The father of Victoria's illegitimate child. Proof! Victoria's hands trembled. This was physical evidence. If this photograph came to light, her lies would crumble. Everything would collapse. Victoria approached the fireplace. The flame was burning. She held the photograph. She hesitated for a moment, looked at Jonathan's face one last time. Then she threw the photograph into the fire. The frame bent, broke. The photograph caught flame, curled, blackened. Within seconds, it was ash. The evidence was gone, but Victoria's fear wasn't gone, because where had Margaret found this photograph? Were there other proofs? Victoria left the room. Her eyes were wet, but she wasn't crying. She couldn't cry, because the night wasn't over yet. Henry's task, the music room. When Henry opened his envelope, it read, "Go to the music room. Inside the piano is a small box. Open the box and take the bottle inside, then return." Henry frowned. Piano? Bottle? What did this mean? But he was beginning to understand Margaret's games. This was a test, perhaps a punishment. Henry went to the music room. The room was cold, unused. In the centre stood a grand piano covered in dust. Henry approached the piano. He lifted the lid. The strings were tarnished, but beneath the strings was a small hidden compartment. Henry reached in and pulled out a box. The box was small, wooden, ornate. Henry opened it. Inside was a bottle. The label read, "Morphine hydrochloride, 100 milligrams." Henry's heart stopped. Inside the box was also a piece of paper. Henry took it, read, "Dr. Blackwell, this bottle is identical to the one you gave George Whitmore. That night, you gave your patient 150 milligrams, a lethal dose. Your record stated 80 milligrams. You lied. This is proof." Henry's hands trembled. How did Margaret know? How did she know the dose? Then Henry understood. Margaret was very close to George's family. Perhaps she had questioned someone at the hospital. Perhaps she had obtained the bottle. Perhaps she had even stolen Henry's own notes. However it was, Margaret knew, and she had proof. Henry put the bottle in his pocket. With trembling legs, he left the room. He returned to the drawing room. The three guests were together again. All had completed their tasks. All were frightened, nervous, angry. Margaret hadn't yet returned. The three looked at each other. No one spoke, because they didn't know what to say. At 10:15, the upstairs door opened again. Lady Margaret appeared. She slowly descended the stairs. She looked at the three guests. "Good," she said. "You've completed your tasks. Now you understand. I know everything. I control everything." Edmund asked angrily, "What do you want from us?" Margaret didn't answer. Instead, she signalled to the servants again. 3 new envelopes were brought. "Your second instruction," Margaret said. "But this time, be more careful. Because this time, everything will change." The envelopes were distributed. Margaret spoke. "At 10 o'clock, the orchestra will begin to play. You must complete these instructions by then. Understood?" All 3 nodded. Margaret smiled. "Excellent. Then get to work." Then she turned and went back upstairs. The 3 guests opened the envelopes, and this time the instructions were much darker. Edmund's second task. Edmund opened his envelope. Inside it read, "Go down to the basement. In the old wine cellar is a trunk, red, with an iron lock. Break the lock. Read what's inside, then burn it all." Edmund frowned. The basement? The wine cellar? But he wasn't questioning anymore. He was only obeying. Edmund found the stairs to the basement. Dark, narrow stone steps. He held a candle. The flame cast flickering light. The basement was cold and damp. The walls were wet stone. Edmund entered the wine cellar. The shelves were filled with old wine bottles, most dusty, some broken. At the very back in the corner stood a red trunk, locked with iron. Edmund found tools, a hammer and a thick rod. He tried to break the lock. After a few blows, the lock broke and the trunk opened. Inside were hundreds of papers, letters, documents, contracts. Edmund picked up a few and read them. All were about the Ashford Thornfield past. Forgery documents from Edmund's grandfather, stolen money, manipulated accounts. Every document was a crime. Every letter was evidence. Edmund's family was guilty, and this trunk contained all the proof. What had Margaret told him to do? Burn it. Edmund gathered the documents, took them to the fireplace, threw them in the fire. One by one they burned. The papers curled, blackened, turned to ash. The Ashford family's crimes became history. But Edmund's conscience wasn't eased, because the truth hadn't changed. It had only been hidden. Victoria's second task. Victoria opened her envelope. "Go to the white room on the 3rd floor. In the closet is a white baby dress. Take it and tear it, then throw it away." Victoria's eyes filled with tears. A baby dress. Was it her daughter's dress? How had Margaret found it? Victoria climbed to the 3rd floor, found the white room, small, empty, only a closet. She opened the closet. Inside hung a small baby dress, white with lace trim, very small, for a baby. Victoria took the dress. It was soft. She smelled it, a faint lavender scent. Her eyes welled up. What if her daughter wore this dress? Where was her daughter now? Was she happy? Healthy? Victoria would never know. Margaret had told her to tear the dress. Victoria trembled. She couldn't do it, but Margaret was waiting. And if Victoria didn't do it, her secret would be exposed. Victoria took a deep breath. She held the dress and tore it. The fabric tore easily. The lace came off. Victoria tore more until the dress was in pieces. Then she threw the pieces in the trash. Victoria sank to the floor and began to cry, silently in agony, but crying didn't change anything. Henry's second task. Henry opened his envelope. "Go up to Lady Margaret's room. On the desk is a letter. Read it, then sign it." Henry's stomach turned. Margaret's room? This was too personal, too dangerous. But he had no choice. Henry climbed to the 3rd floor, found Margaret's room, opened the door. The room was magnificent but gloomy. Dark furniture, heavy curtains, an old smell. The desk was by the window. On it lay a letter. Henry picked it up and read, "I, Dr. Henry Blackwell, acknowledge that on June 15th, 1888, I caused the death of George Whitmore by administering an incorrect morphine dose. This death was an accident, but I concealed my guilt by altering my report. I sign this confession voluntarily. Below was a signature line. Henry's hand trembled. This was a confession, a legal document. If he signed it, Margaret would control him forever. But if he didn't sign, Margaret would use the evidence she already had. Either way, Henry was doomed. Henry took the pen. He hesitated for a moment. Then he signed his name. The confession was complete. Henry left the letter on the desk and exited the room. By 10 o'clock, the 3 guests had gathered in the drawing room again. All had completed their second tasks. All were exhausted, frightened, hopeless. Margaret hadn't yet returned. Edmund asked quietly, "What happens now?" Victoria didn't answer, neither did Henry. Because at that moment the lights went out. The drawing room was suddenly plunged into darkness. The candles went out all at once, as if someone had blown them out. Even the flame in the fireplace flickered and died. The 3 guests froze. In the darkness they could see nothing. Victoria whispered, "What's happening?" Edmund didn't answer, but his heart was racing. Then sounds were heard. Footsteps. Quick. Light. Someone was moving. Henry shouted, "Who's there? Who is it?" No answer came. Then another sound. Breathing. Heavy, choked breathing and a scream. Cut short. Strangled. Terrifying. Victoria shrieked, "Margaret!" The lights came back on. The candles relit. The fireplace flared up again. The drawing room brightened, and the 3 guests saw a body lying on the floor. Lady Margaret Thornfield lay motionless in the centre of the drawing room. Her face looked upward. Her eyes were open, frozen. Her mouth was slightly open, as if gasping for one last breath. Purple fingerprints marked her throat. She had been strangled. Victoria screamed and backed away. Edmund froze in shock. Henry rushed forward, knelt beside Margaret. He checked for a pulse. There was none. She wasn't breathing. Henry stood, looked at the other 2. His voice was shaking. "She's dead. She's dead." Victoria was still screaming. Edmund tried to calm her. Henry looked at Margaret again. The marks on her throat were clear. Someone had strangled her, with hands, strong hands. Edmund asked, What happened?" Henry couldn't answer, because he was in shock too. But one thing was clear. One of the 3 was lying, because when the lights went out, all 3 were in the drawing room, and someone had approached Margaret, strangled her. Who? Victoria couldn't breathe. She leaned against the wall, trembling. Her eyes were locked on Margaret's body, those purple marks, that frozen gaze. Edmund sat in a chair. He put his head in his hands. This couldn't be real. It couldn't be. Henry stood, staring at the body. As a doctor, he had seen death. But this was different. This was murder. Edmund finally spoke. His voice was weak, trembling. "The police. We must call the police." Henry nodded. "Yes, immediately." But Victoria cried out, "No." Both turned to her. Victoria continued, her voice panicked. "The police can't come. If they do, everything will come out. Margaret's files, the evidence, will all be ruined." Edmund protested. But this is murder. Someone killed her." Victoria looked at him. "Yes, and that someone is here, in this room, one of the 3 of us." Silence. Henry spoke slowly. Are you accusing me?" Victoria: "I'm not accusing anyone, but I know the truth. When the lights went out, we were all here, and someone approached Margaret." Edmund: "But it was dark. We couldn't see anything." Victoria: "Exactly. So one of the 3 of us is lying, Henry. Or there's someone else." Both looked at him. Henry continued. "Someone else. In the house. Hiding. And they killed Margaret." Edmund: "Who?" Henry: "I don't know. But it's possible." Victoria thought, then slowly nodded. "Maybe. But the police still can't come. Because if they investigate, they'll ask questions. Why are we here? What did Margaret do to us? The files will come out." Edmund: "So what do we do?" Victoria answered coldly, "We're going to lie." Henry objected. "This is madness. We can't cover up a murder." Victoria: "We won't cover it up. We'll just change it." Edmund: "How?" Victoria: "Margaret was old, 78. If she's found dead in the morning, we'll say natural causes, heart attack, stroke. Who would question it? Henry. But she was strangled. There are marks on her neck. Victoria. We'll cover the marks, dress her in a high-collared nightgown, carry her to her bed. In the morning the servants will find her. You'll write the report, Henry. Natural causes. Done. Edmund. But what about Margaret's family? Victoria. She has no family, no children. Her sister died 10 years ago. She's alone. No one will question it. Henry. But this is wrong. This is a crime. Victoria gave him a sharp look. Henry, you've already committed a crime. You killed George Whitmore. This is no different. Henry froze. I didn't do it intentionally, Victoria. But you killed him nonetheless, and you changed the report. What's the difference now? Silence. Edmund asked, But what about the real killer? If there's someone else? Victoria. Then we'll find them, but first we protect ourselves. Henry nodded, but he was uncertain. So was Edmund. Victoria spoke firmly. Listen, we have no choice. If we go to the police, we'll all be ruined. Our secrets will be in the newspapers. Our lives will be over. But if we stay silent, if we make Margaret's death look natural, we'll survive. Edmund. But one of the three of us could be the killer. Victoria. Yes, and we need to find out, but first let's agree. To the outside world, we all tell the same story. Margaret died of natural causes. That's it. Henry took a deep breath. All right, but we must find the truth. Victoria. We will. Edmund nodded. Agreed. The three made a pact. The murder would be concealed, but first they had to deal with Margaret's body. Victoria commanded, Henry, you're a doctor. You need to examine the body for marks. Is there any other evidence? Henry approached Margaret. He looked carefully. The marks on her throat were very clear. Fingerprints. Strong hands. Could be male hands. Henry. The marks look male, but I'm not certain. Victoria. Anything else? Henry checked Margaret's hands. In her left hand was a scrap of paper, tightly gripped. Henry carefully extracted it. On the paper was written a name. Thomas Webb Edmund. Thomas Webb? Who's that? Victoria. I don't know. Henry. Margaret's former servant. He was dismissed 10 years ago. Something to do with her sister's death, they said. Edmund. But he's not here tonight. There are only the three of us. Victoria. Or so we think. Henry. What do you mean? Victoria. Maybe Thomas was here, hiding, and then he killed Margaret. Edmund. But why? And how did he get in? Victoria. I don't know. But this paper is a clue. Margaret wrote it. Maybe in her final moment. Henry. Or someone planted it to mislead us. Silence. All three thought. Victoria. In any case, first we must move the body. Edmund and Henry together lifted Margaret's body. It was heavy, motionless. They carried her to the stairs up to the 3rd floor into her bedroom. They laid her on the bed. Victoria brought a high-collared nightgown. Together they dressed Margaret to cover the marks on her throat. When they finished, Margaret looked as if she were sleeping, peaceful, an old woman who had died in her sleep. Victoria. Perfect. In the morning the servants will find her, and they'll say natural causes, Henry. I hope so, Edmund. What now? Victoria. Now we find the truth. The three returned to the drawing room. They sat, looked at each other. Victoria spoke. Now, let's be honest. When the lights went out, where was each of us? Edmund. I was by the window. I didn't move. Victoria. I was by the fireplace. I could see Edmund, but it was dark. Henry. I was by the door. I didn't see anyone. Victoria. So the three of us were in different places, and Margaret was in the centre. Henry. Yes, but in the darkness someone approached her. Who? Edmund. It wasn't me. I didn't leave my spot. Victoria. Neither did I. Henry. Neither did I. Silence. Edmund. So we all claim to be innocent. Victoria. Or one of us is lying. Henry. Or there's a fourth person. Edmund. Thomas Webb. Victoria. Yes, we must find him. Searching the house. The three decided to search the manor. If Thomas was hiding here, they needed to find him. Victoria. Let's split up. Each search a wing. Edmund. But what if the killer is still here? Isn't that dangerous? Victoria. When the three of us are together, he won't attack, but still, be careful. Henry. If someone finds something. Victoria. Shout. We'll all come. They agreed. Edmund searched the west wing. Victoria, the east wing. Henry, the basement. Edmund's search. West wing. With a candle in hand, Edmund walked through dark corridors. He opened every door, checked every room, empty bedrooms, unused parlours, dusty furniture. No one was there. But in one room he noticed something. A window was open. A slight breeze was coming in. Snow had piled on the windowsill. Edmund approached the window, looked outside. Snow was still falling, but on the ground were fresh footprints. Someone had exited through this window, or entered. Edmund's heart racing, he turned back. Victoria's search. East wing. While searching the east wing, Victoria came to the old room of Lady Anne. The door was slightly ajar. Victoria entered. The room was exactly as it had been 10 years ago. Nothing had changed. On the desk lay a letter. Victoria picked it up, read, "Dear Thomas, I love you. My family will never accept it, but we'll run away. Tonight. Be ready. Anne." Victoria's heart quickened. This letter was from Anne, written to Thomas. They had planned to run away, but that night Anne had died, fallen down the stairs. Was it an accident? Or... Victoria turned back. Henry's search. Basement. Henry went down to the basement. Dark, cold, damp. The candle in his hand cast flickering light. He passed the old wine cellar, checked the coal room. Empty. But at the very back was a small door. Henry hadn't noticed it before. He opened the door. Inside was a narrow corridor. Henry walked. At the end of the corridor was another door. He opened it and was shocked. Inside was a small room, and in the room was a bed, used, fresh. Someone had been staying here. Beside the bed was a bag. Henry opened it. Inside were clothes, men's clothes, and at the bottom a photograph, a young woman, Lady Anne. Henry understood. Thomas Webb had been staying here, secretly, perhaps for weeks, and tonight he had killed Margaret. Henry ran upstairs, sharing the discoveries. The three gathered in the drawing room again. All were out of breath. Edmund. I found an open window in the west wing. Someone went out through it. Victoria. In the east wing, Lady Anne's letter, written to Thomas. They were planning to run away. Henry. In the basement, a hidden room. Thomas was staying there. Recently. Silence. Edmund. So Thomas was here. He killed Margaret. Then he escaped. Victoria. But why? Revenge? Henry. Lady Anne's death. Maybe Margaret accused him. Thomas wanted revenge. Edmund. Makes sense. Victoria. But where is Thomas now? Henry. He escaped. Through the window. There are footprints. Victoria. The police will find him. Edmund. But we can't call the police, remember? Silence. Victoria. So what do we do? Henry. Nothing. Thomas escaped. Margaret is dead. We stay silent. Edmund. But justice. Victoria. Justice isn't for us. For us it's survival. The three agreed. The plan was this. They would wait until morning. The servants would find Margaret. Natural causes. No one would question it. They wouldn't mention Thomas. The secret would be buried. But the three didn't know that Thomas Webb wasn't at Willowbrook that night. The real killer was still among them, and for 30 years he would lie. The night was long and sleepless. The three guests sat in the drawing room. No one slept. No one spoke. They only waited. At 7 in the morning, the first servant arrived, an elderly woman, the housekeeper. She went upstairs to Lady Margaret's room. A few minutes later, a scream was heard. The servant ran downstairs. Lady Margaret, she's dead! The three guests feigned shock. Victoria screamed. Edmund jumped to his feet. Henry ran upstairs. Henry examined Margaret. No pulse, no breath. Henry came downstairs, looked at the servants with a sorrowful expression. I'm afraid Lady Margaret died last night. Probably a heart attack. She was of advanced age. The servants wept, but didn't question. The local doctor was called. He came, examined the body, read Henry's report, nodded, yes, heart attack, natural causes. The death certificate was signed, the police weren't called, and thus Lady Margaret Thornfield's death was recorded as natural. On the afternoon of December 15th, the three guests left Willowbrook. They said their farewells, politely, distantly. Edmund, a terrible night. I hope we never see each other again. Victoria, I hope so too. Henry, farewell. The carriages departed. The three went in different directions, and they never saw each other again, but all carried the same secret, the true cause of Lady Margaret Thornfield's death, March 1918. The Great War was still raging, but Dr. Henry Blackwell wasn't seeing the war, because he was dying. Cancer, lungs. There was no cure. Henry lay in a small hospital room. He was 68 years old, alone. He had never married, had no children, only secrets. For 30 years he had carried George Whitmore's death. For 30 years he had concealed Lady Margaret's murder, and he could bear it no longer. He asked a nurse for paper and pen. He began to write a confession letter. I, Dr. Henry Blackwell, write this letter on my deathbed. My conscience can no longer bear it. I must tell the truth. On the night of December 14th, 1888, at Willowbrook Manor, Lady Margaret Thornfield died. The official report said natural causes, but I lied. Lady Margaret was strangled to death, and I killed her. That night Margaret blackmailed me. She knew about George Whitmore's death. She threatened me. When the lights went out, in my panic, I strangled her. Only a few seconds, but it was enough. Lord Edmund Ashford and Lady Victoria Pemberton were innocent. They didn't know, but I convinced them. The murder had to be concealed, because Margaret could have destroyed us all. We blamed a man named Thomas Webb, but Thomas wasn't there that night. I planted evidence. I wrote Thomas's name in Margaret's hand. Edmund and Victoria believed it. For 30 years I lied. But now I'm dying, and I don't want to die with this guilt. Send this letter to the police. Let justice be served, even if late. Dr. Henry Blackwell, March 12, 1918. Henry sealed the letter. On the envelope he wrote, Metropolitan Police, London. He handed it to the nurse. Please, post it. The nurse nodded. Of course, doctor. That night, Henry Blackwell died, quietly, alone. But his letter had been sent. March 18th, 1918. The letter reached the Metropolitan Police. Detective Inspector William Grant opened it, read it. He was shocked. The Willowbrook case from 1888. Natural causes, it had said, but now a confession. Grant began investigating. He pulled out old records. Death certificate, signed by Dr. Henry Blackwell. Witnesses, Lord Edmund Ashford and Lady Victoria Pemberton. Grant wrote letters to Edmund and Victoria. Edmund was now 65, living alone. Ashford Manor had long been sold. Debts paid. But Edmund was still poor. When the letter came, his hands trembled. He read Henry's confession and was shocked. Henry was the killer. For 30 years they had blamed the wrong man. Thomas Webb was innocent, and Henry had sat at the same dinner table with them every night, breathed the same air. Edmund set down the letter. Tears fell. But what could he do? Henry was already dead. There could be no justice. Victoria was 62, living in a small house in London. She was still beautiful but tired. When the letter came, her face paled as she read it. Henry. 30 years. For 30 years they had lied. For 30 years they had blamed Thomas. Victoria tore up the letter, threw it in the fireplace, because if the truth came out, her secrets would too. The illegitimate child, the blackmail, the murder cover-up. Victoria would stay silent. Forever. In 1920, a young journalist, while going through old police files, found Henry's confession. His name was Robert Finch. He loved scandal stories. Robert investigated, found Edmund and Victoria, requested interviews. Edmund and Victoria refused, but Robert didn't give up. He visited Willowbrook, found former servants, examined records, and wrote an article. The London Gazette headline, The Last Dance at Willowbrook Hall, 30 Years of Lies. In 1888, the death of Lady Margaret Thornfield was recorded as natural causes. But a newly discovered confession letter reveals the truth was far darker. Dr. Henry Blackwell confessed on his deathbed. He strangled Lady Margaret to death. And two witnesses, Lord Edmund Ashford and Lady Victoria Pemberton, helped him conceal the murder. For 30 years they lied. For 30 years an innocent man was blamed. This is Willowbrook's dark secret. The article shook London. Edmund and Victoria's names were exposed. Society condemned them. Murderers' accomplices, they said. Liars, they said. Edmund could no longer go on living. The scandal destroyed him. No one spoke to him. When he walked in the street, people stared, whispered. In 1922, Edmund took his own life. At home, alone, he drank a bottle of morphine, ironically the same method Henry had used. No one came to his funeral. Victoria lived longer, but she wasn't happy. The scandal had killed her socially. She received no invitations. She had no friends left. In 1925, Victoria too died. Of natural causes, alone, silent. On her gravestone were only her name and dates. Nothing else. Willowbrook Manor was abandoned. No one wanted to live there. In the 1930s, the manor was sold. The new owners moved out within a year. Haunted, they said. In the 1940s, Willowbrook stood empty. Windows broke. The roof collapsed. In the 1950s, the manor was slated for demolition. But no workers would agree to work there. Now Willowbrook still stands, a ruin, dark, silent. But some swear, if you pass by at night, you can still hear the orchestra, playing a waltz, the music of the last dance, and thanks for the watching. Willowbrook's secrets end here. But hidden in history's dark corners are hundreds more stories, each one filled with forgotten lives, buried truths, and unsolved mysteries. If you want to continue discovering these tales from the Victorian era, please subscribe and turn on notifications, because in the next video, I'll take you to another time, another secret, and this time, the truth may be even darker.